How does a violin maker sharpen their tools? That's a fantastic question. Come along for the ride. For the non-woodworkers out there, I'll also throw in just a kitchen knife, just because. There are as many opinions on sharpening as there are woodworkers, it seems. A lot of people have their own systems. This one is mine and it works for me. If you have your own and it's different and it works for you, great. So don't be all up in the comments like, oh, you're doing it wrong just because it's not your system. It works for me. At its most fundamental, sharpening is about the meeting of two angles at the point. Now, you want these two different angles to meet with zero radius. That means that these lines perfectly terminate, just kind of going off into infinity as they meet each other. And if you see light reflecting across the edge, if you sight down it this way, then those are dull spots you need to take out. Case in point, you can see some dull spots along this knife. So one thing that is just as important as the sharpness of where those edges meet is the edge geometry. An edge with a slightly less acute angle like this one is not going to cut as finely as this sharper angle will. That also means that this one is going to be less susceptible to damage. It's a compromise between edge durability and sharpness. And today I'll be demonstrating the use of my Japanese water stones. This one is a single combination stone. It's got 1200 grit on one side and 8000 grit on the other. Now, one thing that has to be done with water stones is continuously flattening the surface as you use it. The abrasive medium is designed to wear away, exposing new and fresh abrasive. And in order to make sure that I am flat all the way across, I'm drawing just some rough pencil lines across, and I'm using this diamond stone. Now, in order to flatten properly, you have to use a figure 8 motion, because if you just simply work back and forth, there's a possibility that you could crown the stone going this way or this way, and that's no good. So my pencil lines are still here on the sides. That means that I still need to keep going. And pencil lines are gone. That means this stone is completely flat and ready to use. Now, when you're talking about single bevel tools, such as hand plane irons and chisels, you have to sharpen the back as well as sharpen this cutting edge, because if you do one without the other, then it's not going to work. Just get a little bit of water on the abrasive, place it nice and flat, good pressure, and work side to side. That I'm getting a fairly uniform grit pattern. Although you see this corner here, it's shinier than the rest of it. That means that it hasn't been touched by the stone. So that means that this is a low spot. So I need to keep working until this low spot disappears. All right, that's looking better. You don't want this lifting off as you work. Now with the back sharpened, now it's time to move on to honing the bevel. And I do work this back and forth in its initial phase. And it's also important to work side to side across the stone for a narrower tool. That way it wears more evenly, and you're not just creating a dish right in the center of the stone. And I do the same thing with a plane iron. Just find that bevel, raise it up just a tad, and that's your cutting angle. Now this carving knife of mine, this is another story altogether, because this does not have a flat on the back. This has got a double bevel on it. So you need to work these two bevels until they meet with a 0 radius. That means that each one of these sharpening angles is going to be lifted up off the stone rather than having one of these flat. Now I'm not really pushing with my arms. I'm kind of moving with my whole body. You can't really see that on camera, but I'm basically swaying back and forth just so that my elbows don't bend and I don't end up pushing this and creating a scooping motion as I polish this. Now gouges are a different story altogether because of their curved edges. In order to polish the inside, I'm using a buffing wheel. I need to get some conical slipstones that can get inside here and really give this a good honing whenever I need to. For right now, I've not used these enough to really throw the back edge out of alignment that much. But obviously with this curved edge, you can't sharpen it the same way as you would a knife, chisel, or a plane iron. First thing you do is find your bevel angle. And you're going to want to keep this raised, and I hold my gouges off to the side. And what I do in order to sharpen them is, as I pull back, I twist. I create this kind of motion. And I don't really go back and forth. I just go in one direction just to keep my axis of movement stable. Now you can see that freshly honed edge. Now it's time to move on to the 8000 grit. You'll notice as I'm flattening this that it doesn't make nearly the same amount of sound just because the grit on this is so much finer. I would describe waterstone sharpening as messy but worth it. At the 8000 grit, I simply cut on the pull stroke. Let's polish the back. Now you really see that steel come off. Now we do the same with the plane iron. Find your angle and pull to cut. Pull and twist stroke. Now I used to use a leather strop with this chromium oxide compound in order to polish up my edges, and this still works just fine. However, I found something that also works for me, and it's a lot faster and more reliable. I do own a lathe, which is right now set up as kind of my buffing, polishing compound station. And right now, this has got about a 6-inch buffing wheel on it, and this is all cotton, and it is loaded with the chromium oxide compound. So I get this going to about 3000 RPM. Get a little bit of this compound. Because I don't have a polishing stone that will get inside this gouge, I simply rely on the buffing wheel to polish that area inside of it. Now that's a good sharp edge. Glows like a lightsaber, and the back cutting edge should be a full mirror polish. Block planes cutting great. Nice, unbroken, full width shavings. And this surface is smoother than any sandpaper can possibly get you. it's hard to catch this kitchen knife in camera. You see that little glinting along the edge right there? That means that the edge is deformed in that spot. Now the geometry of the kitchen knife means that it requires a different stroke when you're sharpening, rather than straight back or side to side. This requires a slightly more complex motion as you sharpen. After you give each side the same number of strokes, flip to an alternating pattern. Before you proceed to the next grit, make sure that those glinting spots of light are gone. On to the 8000 grit. Here, I'm only doing the alternating stroke. And for a blade the size of a kitchen knife, I am going to finish on my leather strop. So, no product placement, but I do like this knife from the big Swedish box store. It does happen to have really exceptional edge geometry, and that's almost as, well, that is as important as how sharp the edge is. And the edge geometry means that the shape of the blade itself, it doesn't simply come up to a sort of point and then a very steep secondary bevel. No, this primary angle meets at a very, very narrow point, and that's what's sharpened, and that makes for a really dang good cutting edge in the kitchen, and I really like this one, so recommendation. I think it'll work.